I'm Professor Richard Herr. I teach at the University of Tasmania in the School of Law, Parliamentary Law and Practice, but I've also worked for the last 35 years or so as a consultant to the governments of the region, the South Pacific region, on regional affairs. Well, at the moment, Australian diplomacy within the Pacific Islands region is under some stress from a variety of reasons. On a global level, of course, we've had to adjust to the fact that in the post-Cold War era, there have been a whole range of new players coming into the Pacific Islands with different agendas and different objectives, and that impacts on the relationship that Australia's had with its traditional friends in the islands. And within the regional context, of course, we've had the difficulty of dealing with the government in Fiji after the coup in 2006, where we've put sanctions on Fiji, and that's put stress on the regional system because friends of both Australia and Fiji have been forced to try and either take sides or avoid taking sides, and that's made the diplomacy that we have with the region a bit more difficult, a bit more complex, more challenging. Yeah. We've been, that's to say, Australia has been a element for unifying the Pacific Islands since the Second World War. It was an Australian initiative along with New Zealand that helped to create the regional system of the South Pacific. We've been a primary funder of its activities. We've been a genuine partner in so many of its activities. Along with New Zealand, we are insiders, if you like, within the regional system. We're original members of the South Pacific Forum, now called the Pacific Islands Forum. We continue to play an active role. So I think there's no doubt that Australia has seen itself as a major contributor to Pacific Islands unity. On the other hand, we're also a donor. We're an outsider in the sense that we aren't a recipient or a beneficiary directly of the activities of the regional system. And that schizophrenia, that dual role, does create, again, challenges, difficulties in managing our relationship, because sometimes we play the donor card, sometimes we play the insider card, and it can be confusing to even those within the region who are used to this kind of dual role. We've been distressed by this rivalry. We were particularly distressed in terms of when we saw it as checkbook diplomacy. We certainly didn't like to see our friends in the region appear to be selling sovereignty. It demeaned sovereignty and demeaned the relationship. On the other hand, the islands thought at times Australia was rather precious about some of these things. When islands were criticized for selling passports, they looked at Australia and said, but you sell passports because you sell business access to Australia. What's the difference? And of course, so there have been differences of opinion perhaps at times about this, but we've been friends with both countries. Australia contributed to the People's Republic's involvement in the Pacific. We helped to smooth the way for the diplomatic relations that China was able to establish with Fiji and then with Samoa in 1975 and 1976 respectively. And of course that then disconcerted the Republic of China, which found that they were confronted with the One China policy and what to do about it in an area where they had reasonably free access before. So it has been challenging for Australia to try and manage this and remain friends with both, but we've certainly tried. Well, the Pacific Plan has been endorsed by the Pacific Islands Forum since 2005. It's been the intention is to have a much stronger relationship within the region, a much more integrated regional system. And while it wouldn't go as far as the European Union politically and so forth, it's certainly much farther than the islands perhaps had expected, and that's creating some difficulty. I mean, even in personal relationships, the closer the relationship, the more careful you have to be about the other parties in the relationship. And certainly the Pacific Plan is finding that it is difficult to make sure that 16 countries, 14 island states and Australia and New Zealand together, 16 countries, can coordinate this closer relationship effectively without stepping on each other's toes and creating difficulties that are destructive of the relationship. And that's why it's gone perhaps more slowly than Australia and New Zealand would have liked, perhaps faster than some of the island states would have liked. Well, the difficulties occur in, as we're negotiating now, closer economic ties. Good governance issues have been difficult because, especially with regard to the sanctions against Fiji, of course, they've raised all sorts of questions. We've had the regional intervention in the Solomon Islands to help provide for security after the civil war, in effect, in the Solomons in the early 2001, 2002, 2003 era. These have been problems to be managed, and again, you get difficulties. Most Solomon Islanders, for example, have been very pleased to have greater security, but others have found it a bit tiresome to have Australians and others telling them what to do with their own country. You expect these difficulties because the problems themselves are, if not insurmountable, they're clearly not insurmountable, but they evoke different responses from people as to who's getting the benefit of it, who's paying the cost of it, what do they expect, etc. So yes, as soon as you move into closer economic ties, closer political ties, closer administrative arrangements, etc., you run into problems as to who's responsible for these things and who gets to have the biggest say in the right answer.